December 8th, 1941, 11:43 p.m., downtown Seattle, Washington. The streets should be dark. Every window, every storefront, every street lamp extinguished under the mandatory blackout order that went into effect just hours after the news from Pearl Harbor reached the mainland. But there, on the corner of 3rd Avenue, the electric sign above Henderson's clothing store still burns bright against the night sky. A beacon visible for miles, a target marker for enemy bombers that might be crossing the Pacific at this very moment. More than 1,000 citizens gather below, their faces lit by that defiant glow. You can hear the murmur of anger, the sharp edge of fear. Someone throws the first rock. The sound of shattering glass cuts through the December air. Then another rock, and another. For an hour, the crowd pelts the sign with stones, trying to extinguish each bulb one by one. They are not vandals. They are terrified Americans who watched the newsreels this morning. The USS Arizona burning in the harbor, oil-slicked water ablaze, 2,403 Americans dead in a single Sunday morning. When a store employee finally arrives to switch off the lights, the mob doesn't disperse. They move down the street, breaking into other businesses, hunting for any illumination that might guide Japanese bombers to their city. For a brief moment, they stop to sing "God Bless America," their voices ragged with patriotism and panic. Then they continue their self-appointed mission of enforced darkness. This is the new reality along the West Coast. Relations between the United States and Japan have been deteriorating for years, as Japan pushed deeper into China and Southeast Asia. American embargoes and restrictions were meant to contain Japanese expansion, but everyone knew they were pushing Japan toward a decision point. That decision came at 7:55 a.m. Hawaiian time, when hundreds of Japanese warplanes launched from aircraft carriers far out to sea and turned Pearl Harbor into an inferno. Nothing like this has ever happened to the United States before. For the first time in modern history, America has been attacked on its own soil. 8 battleships sunk or damaged. 3 light cruisers, 3 destroyers, 4 other naval vessels crippled, 164 aircraft destroyed before they could even get airborne. The Pacific Fleet, America's primary defense against Japanese aggression, lies broken in the harbor. And now, as December stretches into a cold, anxious winter, the question on every West Coast resident's mind is simple and terrifying. Are we next? The fear is not irrational. On June 21, 1942, a Japanese submarine will surface off the Oregon coast and shell Fort Stevens at the mouth of the Columbia River. Later that same year, Japanese forces will invade and occupy the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. The enemy is not some distant abstraction. They are here in American waters, testing defenses, probing for weakness. Seattle installs air raid sirens on its hills and in the middle of downtown. Mobile anti-aircraft units roll through residential neighborhoods. Blackout drills become a nightly routine. By 11 p.m., every light in the city must be extinguished. Tens of thousands of volunteers, including women and children, enforce the darkness. They stand at street corners, knock on doors, report violators. The civilian population has been weaponized by fear, but some targets cannot be hidden by darkness alone. 5 miles south of downtown Seattle, along the eastern bank of the Duwamish River, sits Boeing Plant 2, a sprawling industrial complex covering 1.7 million square feet. From the air, it is unmistakable. Massive rectangular buildings, a network of taxiways connecting directly to Boeing Field, and a steady stream of silver bombers emerging from the assembly lines. By late 1941, Boeing is producing nearly 1/3 of all new aircraft for the American war effort. If the Japanese want to cripple American military production, Boeing Plant 2 is the target, and everyone knows it can be seen from 10,000 feet up. Boeing Plant 2, the target that couldn't be hidden, February 15, 1942. 6:47 a.m. Boeing Plant 2, Seattle, Washington. The factory floor stretches before you like a steel prairie. 600,000 square feet of assembly line, expanded from the original 60,000 square foot building that opened in 1936. The air smells of oil, hot metal, and the sweat of 30,000 workers who pass through these doors every day, turning out 300 aircraft per year. Their identification badges are pinned to the outside of their clothing. Mandatory policy, visible at all times, no exceptions. Above your head, B-17 flying fortresses take shape in stages, moving down the line like mechanical evolution. This is where the legend was born. The first B-17 prototypes were built here in the late 1930s, before anyone imagined that Boeing Field would become one of the most strategically vital locations in the Pacific Theater. Since then, this facility has produced 6,981 B-17s, the four-engine heavy bombers that will carry the war deep into Nazi Germany. The building itself was designed for efficiency. Boeing's old Plant 1, located down the river, had become obsolete as the company transitioned from small wood and fabric seaplanes to larger all-metal land aircraft. Plant 2 was built as a modern assembly line where metal airframe components could be fabricated and assembled in the same facility, and where completed aircraft would have direct access to an airfield. A local truck driver, wanting to keep Boeing in Seattle, sold the company the land for $1. By May 1940, another 600,000 square feet was added to accommodate production of 380 Douglas DB-7 light bombers. By December 7, 1941, the day Pearl Harbor burned, the plant had expanded to 1,776,000 square feet. B-17s, Boeing 307 Stratliners. Soon, the first 3 B-29 superfortresses will be built here, along with sub-assemblies for the B-29s being produced in Renton, Wichita, Marietta, and Omaha. But from the air, Boeing Plant 2 is a target that screams its own location. The roof is flat, dark, and massive. Seen from a bomber's altitude, say 10,000 feet, the operational ceiling for heavy Mitsubishi Ki-21s of the Imperial Japanese Air Force, the plant is unmistakable. It sits adjacent to Boeing Field, a municipal airport that opened in July 1928 and now serves as the takeoff and landing strip for every aircraft that rolls out of the factory. Taxiways connect the plant directly to the runways. From above, the layout is as clear as a blueprint. Here is the factory, here is the runway, here are the targets. And there is no way to hide it. Camouflage netting might work for smaller structures, but not for something this vast. You cannot simply drape fabric over 1.7 million square feet and expect it to fool aerial reconnaissance. The plant is too large, too geometric, too obviously industrial. Any attempt to conceal it would only draw more attention. Unless you could make it disappear, not by hiding it, but by transforming it into something else entirely, something ordinary, something that would blend into the surrounding neighborhood across the Duwamish River, something a bombardier would glance at and dismiss as irrelevant. Colonel John F. Omer, commanding officer of the Seattle District of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, understands the problem. Boeing Plant 2 is not just a factory. It is a symbol of American industrial might, and its destruction would be a catastrophe not only for military production, but for national morale. The plant must be protected. But how do you protect something that cannot be moved, cannot be hidden, and cannot stop operating for even a single day? Omer's solution is radical. If you cannot hide the factory, make it invisible by disguising it as something else. And if you are going to create an illusion on this scale, you need someone who understands illusion as an art form. You need Hollywood. Enter John Stuart Detley. Hollywood Goes to War, March 3, 1942. 10:15 a.m. Metro Goldwyn Mayer Studios, Culver City, California. John Stuart Detley sits at his drafting table in the MGM art department, surrounded by sketches of lavish ballrooms and European cityscapes. He is 33 years old, a production designer and art director with more than 20 films to his credit. His job is to build worlds that exist only on camera. Elaborate sets that convince audiences they are somewhere else, someone else. He has mastered the craft of creating reality from plywood, paint and clever perspective, but the work feels trivial now. It is 3 months since Pearl Harbor, and every newsreel brings fresh images of devastation. Young men are enlisting by the thousands. Factories are converting to war production. And John Detley, sitting in his studio, is designing fake rooms for romantic comedies. The telegram arrives mid-morning. It is not a request. It is an order. Captain John Stuart Detley is to report to the Seattle District of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for assignment. Immediate departure required. By the time he arrives in Seattle in late March, Detley has been briefed on his mission. Colonel Omer wants to camouflage Boeing Plant too, but not in any conventional sense. The Army engineers need to create the illusion, from the air, that the plant is not an industrial facility at all, but rather a continuation of the residential neighborhoods that surround it. The deception must be convincing enough to fool aerial reconnaissance, and, if necessary, to divert bombers away from the real target. Detley brings his new wife with him, actress Veronica Lake, one of Hollywood's biggest stars, famous for her sultry voice and platinum blonde hair that falls over one eye. They purchase a home on Mercer Island, and while Detley reports for duty, Lake takes a months-long break from filming to participate in war bond drives and civic events. There is no camouflaging her star power. She is a celebrity weapon deployed to rally public support and sell bonds to fund the war. But Detley's work must remain secret. He assembles a team of carpenters, stagehands, painters and decorators, many of them Boeing employees who will work on the camouflage project in addition to their regular shifts on the assembly line. The scale of what they are about to attempt is staggering. They will build a fake town covering 26 acres on top of Boeing Plant 2's roof. 26 acres. To put that in perspective, it is larger than most Hollywood studio backlots. It is larger than many actual neighborhoods, and it must be constructed entirely from lightweight materials that will not damage the factory roof below. Detley approaches the project as he would any film set, but with one critical difference. The audience will be looking down from 10,000 feet, not across from a camera dolly. That changes everything. Details that would be essential on a movie set, paint texture, surface finish, architectural accuracy, become irrelevant. What matters is the silhouette, the shape, the suggestion of normalcy when viewed from above. He begins sketching. Streets and sidewalks will be made from burlap sackcloth, painted to resemble pavement. Trees will be constructed from chicken wire and feathers, painted green. Fences will be cardboard. Cars will be inflatable plastic, light enough to be moved by a single person. And houses, 53 of them in all, will be built as plywood shells, squat and low to the ground. Because from 10,000 feet, no one can tell the difference. The fake structures only need to adhere to scale in plan view, looking straight down, but can be dramatically smaller in elevation. Most of the fake buildings will be less than 6 feet tall, because altitude makes such distinctions impossible to detect. A bombardier flying at operational altitude has seconds to identify targets. He is not looking for architectural detail. He is looking for the shape of industrial buildings, the geometry of runways, the telltale signs of strategic value. Detley's job is to erase those signs, to take 1.7 million square feet of military-industrial complex and turn it into something that looks, from above, like a sleepy suburban neighborhood where nothing interesting ever happens. The project is approved. Construction will begin immediately. And for the next several months, Boeing Plant 2 will be transformed into what the Seattle Daily Times will later dub Boeing Wonderland, the greatest film set ever built for an audience that, if all goes according to plan, will never see it. Building the illusion, constructing a neighborhood from nothing, April 20th, 1942. 7:30 a.m., rooftop of Boeing Plant 2, Seattle, Washington. The roof is vast and flat, a 26-acre expanse of industrial surface that flexes slightly under your boots. 35 feet below, the assembly line roars with activity. Up here, the wind off the Duwamish River cuts through your jacket. Boeing Field stretches to the east, and beyond it, the residential neighborhoods of South Seattle climb the hillsides. From this vantage, you can see exactly what an enemy bombardier would see. A massive, unmistakable factory complex, impossible to miss, impossible to mistake for anything else. John Detley stands at the edge of the roof, holding a blueprint that snaps and flutters in the wind. Around him, dozens of workers, carpenters, painters, Boeing employees pulled from the assembly line, wait for instructions. This is day one of construction, and the scale of the project is overwhelming. In 4 weeks, this empty rooftop must become a convincing suburban neighborhood. "Streets first," Detley calls out, pointing to the western edge of the roof. "Lay the burlap in straight lines, then paint them to look like asphalt. Make sure the pattern matches the neighborhood grid across the river." The work begins. Rolls of burlap sackcloth, hundreds of yards long, are unrolled across the roof and anchored at intervals with wooden stakes. The fabric is coarse and heavy, designed to withstand wind and weather. Once it is laid flat, painters move in with brushes and rollers, coating the burlap with dark grey paint to simulate pavement. Sidewalks are added in lighter shades. Curbs are marked with thin white lines. The effect from ground level is laughably crude. No one would mistake painted burlap for real streets, but Detley keeps reminding everyone, you will never see this from the ground, only from 10,000 feet up. Next come the trees. Bundles of chicken wire are shaped into rough tree forms, then filled with feathers and coated with green paint. The result looks more like abstract sculpture than botany, but when viewed from above, the shapes cast shadows that mimic foliage. Detley has calculated the angle of the sun at different times of day, ensuring that the fake trees will cast convincing shadows during the hours when enemy reconnaissance flights are most likely. Fences are assembled from sheets of cardboard, painted white to resemble picket fences. They are so light that a strong gust of wind can topple them, so workers anchor them with additional stakes driven into seams in the roof. Cars, inflatable plastic shells that weigh almost nothing, are positioned along the fake streets. From above, they will look like parked vehicles. From ground level, they are obviously toys, but ground level does not matter. The houses are the most complex element. 53 structures must be built, each one a plywood shell designed to mimic the residential architecture of South Seattle. But they do not need to be houses in any functional sense. No walls, no interiors, no roofs. They are facades, like the false fronts of Wild West towns in Hollywood westerns. Each structure is less than 6 feet tall, just high enough to cast a shadow, but low enough to avoid adding significant weight to the factory roof. Carpenters work in teams, assembling the frames from 2x4s and then nailing sheets of plywood to create the outer walls. Painters follow behind, adding details, windows, doors, shutters, the texture of wood siding. Some houses are painted white, others in pastel shades, yellow, blue, light green, to match the variety of real homes across the river. The details are minimal, but from altitude they will read as residential architecture. Detley walks the site constantly, checking angles, adjusting placement, ensuring that the fake neighborhood conforms to the grid pattern of real streets. His background in film set design proves invaluable. He understands sight lines, perspective, and the tricks that convince the human eye to see what it expects to see. A bombardier looking down at Boeing Plant 2 will expect to see a factory. Detley's job is to disrupt that expectation, to create just enough cognitive dissonance that the bombardier hesitates, double-checks his maps, and decides he is looking at the wrong location. The work proceeds around the clock. Boeing cannot afford to shut down production, so the camouflage construction happens in shifts coordinated with the factory schedule below. Workers climb onto the roof during breaks, hammer together a few more sections of fake fence, then return to their stations on the assembly line. It is exhausting, But no one complains. Everyone understands what is at stake. By mid-May, the fake neighborhood begins to take shape. From the ground, it looks absurd, a jumble of undersized houses, painted cloth and wire trees. But when Detley climbs into a small plane and views the site from 10,000 feet, he smiles. The illusion works. The factory has vanished, replaced by what looks like an ordinary residential district. The final touches are added: simulated gardens created from patches of painted canvas, fake laundry lines strung between houses, even a few plywood dogs positioned in front yards. Every detail is designed to reinforce the illusion of everyday suburban life. On May 28, 1942, Colonel Omer inspects the completed camouflage. He stands on the roof, surrounded by the fake town, and then boards a reconnaissance aircraft to view it from above. When he lands, he authorizes a commendation for Detley and his team. The project has exceeded expectations. Boeing Wonderland is operational. The fake town takes shape. Details of deception, June 10, 1942. 2:00 p.m. Boeing Wonderland, rooftop of Plant 2, Seattle, Washington. The fake neighborhood now covers every inch of the 26-acre roof. You walk down a burlap street past plywood houses, beneath wire and feather trees that sway slightly in the breeze. It feels like walking through a dream, familiar and alien at the same time. The proportions are wrong, the materials are wrong, but from above, none of that matters. Detley's team has added topography to the illusion. Using sackcloth draped over wooden frames, they have created simulated hills and gentle slopes, breaking up the flat geometry of the roof. Real neighborhoods are not perfectly flat, and neither is Boeing Wonderland. The fabric hills cast shadows, creating the impression of terrain. The streets follow a grid pattern that mirrors the layout of the residential area across the Duwamish River. If an enemy pilot were to study maps of Seattle before a bombing run, the streets of Boeing Wonderland would match the expected neighborhood grid, reinforcing the illusion that this is simply an extension of South Seattle's suburbs. Some of the fake houses have been positioned to obscure key features of the factory below. Air vents, exhaust stacks, and rooftop mechanical systems, anything that might reveal the building's industrial purpose, are hidden beneath plywood facades. The goal is not just to disguise the factory, but to erase any evidence that it exists. The inflatable cars are repositioned regularly to simulate activity. Workers move them from one street to another, creating the appearance of residents coming and going. Occasionally, a car is placed in a fake driveway, then moved to the street, then back to the driveway. These small changes are intended to defeat photographic analysis. If enemy reconnaissance flies over the site multiple times, the images will show subtle differences, suggesting a living, active neighborhood. Detley's Hollywood experience informs every decision. He knows that the most convincing illusions are the ones that include imperfection. A neighborhood that looks too perfect, too orderly, will seem artificial. So he introduces deliberate irregularities: a fence that is slightly crooked, a tree that is positioned asymmetrically, a house with peeling paint. These small flaws make Boeing Wonderland look lived in, authentic. The fake laundry lines are one of Detley's favorite touches. Strips of white cloth hung between houses flutter in the wind. From 10,000 feet, they look like bed sheets and towels drying in the sun. A mundane domestic detail that reinforces the illusion of ordinary suburban life. Even the lighting is considered. During nighttime blackouts, the fake neighborhood remains dark, just like the real neighborhoods around it. But Detley's team has also discussed the possibility of adding fake lights, small electric bulbs positioned to mimic porch lights and street lamps, in case the camouflage ever needs to be used as a decoy during a night raid. The idea is borrowed from other deception projects. If Seattle's real lights are extinguished during an air raid, Boeing Wonderland could light up, drawing enemy bombers away from actual population centers and toward a target filled with nothing but plywood and painted cloth. That plan is never implemented. The risk is too great that the lights would reveal the true nature of the site. But the idea remains in the contingency plans, filed away in case the war takes a turn for the worse. By June 1942, Boeing Wonderland is complete. The 53 fake houses, the miles of burlap streets, the wire trees, the inflatable cars, all of it comes together to create an illusion that is, by any measure, a masterpiece of deception. It is the largest film set ever built, designed for an audience that will hopefully never see it. And for the next 3 years, it will remain Seattle's best-kept secret. Section 6. Living Under the Lie. Life at Boeing Plant, 2 August 14, 1943, 6 a.m. Boeing Plant 2 Assembly Line, Seattle, Washington. 30,000 workers pass through the gates every morning, badges pinned to their chests, lunch pails in hand. They clock in, take their positions on the assembly line, and begin another day of building bombers. Above their heads, hidden from view, Boeing Wonderland bakes in the summer sun. Most of the workers know about the fake neighborhood on the roof. It is impossible to keep such a project secret from the people who helped build it. But they do not talk about it outside the plant. Security protocols are strict, and the consequences for loose talk are severe. Loose lips sink ships, the posters remind them, and everyone understands that the same principle applies to factories. Inside the plant, production continues at a relentless pace. By August 1943, nearly 5,000 B-17 flying fortresses have rolled out of Plant 2, each one destined for the skies over Europe. The assembly line operates 24 hours a day, 3 shifts, with workers stepping over each other to install engines, rivet aluminum skin, and wire electrical systems. The noise is deafening. Pneumatic hammers, metal presses, the roar of engines being tested. There is a strange duality to life at Boeing Plant 2 during the war years. On one hand, the factory is a symbol of American industrial might, churning out the aircraft that will help win the war. On the other hand, it exists in a state of constant, low-level anxiety, the fear that at any moment enemy bombers might appear on the horizon. That fear is not entirely irrational. By mid-1942, Japanese submarines are active off the west coast. On June 21st, a sub surfaces near Fort Stevens, Oregon, and shells the coastal fortification. It is a minor attack, causing little damage, but it proves that Japanese forces are willing and able to strike American territory. Later that year, Japan invades and occupies the Aleutian Islands in Alaska, bringing the enemy within striking distance of the continental United States. Seattle installs more air raid sirens. Anti-aircraft batteries are positioned around Boeing Field. Blackout drills become more frequent, and Boeing Wonderland sits atop Plant 2, a silent guardian waiting to fulfill its purpose. But the attack never comes. Japanese military planners consider raids on the west coast, but the logistical challenges are overwhelming. The distance from Japan to Seattle is immense, and Japanese bombers of the era lack the range to make the round trip without refueling. Aircraft carriers could theoretically launch attacks, but after the Battle of Midway in June 1942, Japan's carrier fleet is too depleted to risk on a mission against heavily defended targets like Boeing's factories. So Boeing Wonderland is never tested. The fake neighborhood remains in place, maintained by workers who periodically climb onto the roof to repair wind damage, repaint faded sections, and reposition inflatable cars. It is a strange routine, caring for a town that does not exist, preparing for an attack that may never happen. But the workers take pride in it. Boeing Wonderland is proof that they are doing everything possible to protect themselves, their families, and their country. It's a small act of defiance against an enemy that has not yet arrived. On the assembly line, the work continues. B-17s give way to B-29 super fortresses, the massive 4-engine bombers that will carry the war to Japan itself. By 1944, Plant 2 is producing sub-assemblies for B-29s being completed at Boeing's Renton facility. The factory has become a critical link in the supply chain that will eventually end the war. Above it all, Boeing Wonderland endures. The plywood houses fade in the sun. The burlap streets fray at the edges. The wire trees lose their feathers, but the illusion holds. From 10,000 feet, Boeing Plant 2 still looks like a quiet neighborhood where nothing important ever happens. And that is exactly the point. The secret that Seattle kept, November 20th, 1944, 3 p.m., downtown Seattle, Washington. The war is turning. In Europe, Allied forces have liberated Paris and are pushing toward Germany. In the Pacific, American forces island hop closer to Japan, reclaiming territory seized in the early days of the war. Victory is no longer a distant hope. It is an inevitable conclusion. But Seattle keeps its secret. For more than 2 years, Boeing Wonderland has existed as an open secret among the city's population. Thousands of people work at Boeing Plant 2. Thousands more live in the surrounding neighborhoods and can see the factory from their windows. And yet no one talks about the fake town on the roof. It is a remarkable example of collective self-censorship. In an era before social media, before instant communication, the citizens of Seattle understand that some information is too dangerous to share. They know that enemy spies might be listening, that loose talk could endanger the very people working to protect them. Newspapers cooperate with the military. The Seattle Daily Times, the city's major paper, does not publish a single word about Boeing Wonderland during the war years. Reporters know about the camouflage. Some have even been allowed to view it from the air. But they honor the blackout on information, understanding that premature disclosure could compromise the defense. It is a level of operational security that would be nearly impossible to maintain in the modern era. But in 1942, in 1943, and 1944, the people of Seattle keep the secret. The silence is enforced by fear. Everyone remembers the panic after Pearl Harbor, the blackouts, the mob breaking storefronts to extinguish lights, the terror that Japanese bombers might appear at any moment. That fear has faded as the war has turned in America's favor, but it has not disappeared. People still conduct blackout drills. Air raid sirens still wail during tests. The possibility of attack, however remote, remains real, and so Boeing Wonderland remains hidden, not because it is physically concealed, but because an entire city chooses not to speak of it. John Detley, the Hollywood set designer who created the illusion, remains in Seattle through 1943. He and Veronica Lake divorced that year, and while Lake returns to Hollywood to resume her acting career, Detley does not. He stays in the Pacific Northwest, continuing his work with the Army Corps of Engineers on other camouflage projects. By late 1944, it is becoming clear that Boeing Wonderland will never be tested. The Japanese military no longer has the resources to launch raids on the American mainland. The war in the Pacific is now being fought thousands of miles away in the Philippines, on Iwo Jima, on Okinawa. Seattle, once bracing for attack, has become a rear area support hub, safely removed from the front lines. But the fake town remains in place. Removing it would be an admission that the threat has passed, and military planners are not yet ready to make that admission. Boeing Wonderland will stay on the roof of Plant 2 until victory is certain. That certainty comes in the summer of 1945. Victory revealed when the cover came off, July 23, 1945. Seattle Daily Times newsroom, Seattle, Washington. The editor holds the photograph in his hands, studying it carefully. It is an aerial shot of Boeing Plant 2, but the factory is invisible. Instead, the image shows a neighborhood, streets, houses, trees, an ordinary suburban landscape. The photograph is captioned, Boeing Wonderland. For the first time, the newspaper is publishing the story of the fake town on the roof. The military has finally lifted the blackout on information. allowing the public to learn about one of the war's most elaborate deception projects. The timing is deliberate. It is 3 weeks before VJ Day, the day Japan will formally surrender. The war in Europe ended in May, and the war in the Pacific is in its final stages. American forces are preparing for a possible invasion of the Japanese mainland, but there is also talk of a new weapon, something so devastating that it might end the war without invasion. No one yet knows about the atomic bombs that will fall on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August, but everyone senses that the end is near, and so, with victory assured, the secret can finally be told. The Seattle Daily Times publishes the photograph on July 23, 1945, describing Boeing Wonderland as an engineering and artistic marvel. The story explains how John Detley, a Hollywood set designer, was brought to Seattle to create a fake neighborhood covering 26 acres. It describes the plywood houses, the burlap streets, the wire trees, the inflatable cars. It reveals that 53 structures were built, each one designed to fool enemy bombers into thinking they were looking at an ordinary residential district. The public reaction is one of astonishment. For 3 years, Boeing Wonderland existed as an open secret, known to thousands but spoken of by no one. Now, with the photographs published, people can finally discuss what they saw, what they knew, what they suspected. Boeing employees pose for photographs on the fake rooftop, standing in front of plywood houses, grinning beside inflatable cars. The images are surreal. Real people in a fake town, celebrating a deception that was never used. Newsreels pick up the story. Within weeks, audiences across America are watching footage of Boeing Wonderland, marveling at the scale and audacity of the project. It becomes one of the feel-good stories of the war's final days, a symbol of American ingenuity, creativity, and determination. On August 15, 1945, Japan surrenders. World War II is over. The threat that Boeing Wonderland was built to counter has been eliminated not by camouflage, but by overwhelming military force and the devastating power of atomic weapons. In 1946, the fake town is dismantled. Workers climb onto the roof of Plant 2 and begin taking down the plywood houses, rolling up the burlap streets, dismantling the wire trees. The materials are salvaged or discarded. Within a few months, the 26-acre roof is empty again, a flat industrial surface with no trace of the neighborhood that once existed there. John Detley and his engineering team receive an Army commendation for their work. The official citation praises their ingenuity, dedication, and artistic skill in the creation of a defensive illusion that contributed to the security of a vital military production facility. Boeing Plant 2 returns to its normal operations. Over the next decades, it will produce B-50 Superfortresses, B-47 Stratojets, B-52 Stratofortresses, and eventually the first Boeing 737s. The factory that was once hidden beneath a fake town becomes a symbol of American aerospace dominance. But by the 1980s, the plant is showing its age. Production moves to more modern facilities. The building falls into disrepair. Water mains break, flooding the tunnels below. Earthquakes damage the structure. In 2010, demolition begins. Today, the site where Boeing Plant 2 once stood is a parking lot. A few satellite buildings remain, but the main factory, the birthplace of the B-17, the hidden fortress, the foundation for Boeing Wonderland, is gone. All that remains are photographs, newsreels, and the memory of the greatest set Hollywood never filmed. Legacy of Shadows, what Boeing Wonderland taught us present day. Museum of Flight, Seattle, Washington. The exhibit is small, tucked into a corner of the museum's main gallery. A few photographs, some blueprints, a short video loop showing aerial footage of Boeing Wonderland. Visitors pause, read the placards, and move on. Most are here to see the B-17 flying fortress on display, not the fake town that once protected the factory where it was built. But Boeing Wonderland's legacy extends far beyond a museum exhibit. It represents a moment when the line between reality and illusion became a weapon of war. Deception has always been a part of warfare. Sun Tzu wrote about it 2,500 years ago. But Boeing Wonderland took deception to a new level, using the techniques of Hollywood cinema to create a three-dimensional illusion designed to fool aerial reconnaissance. It was not camouflage in the traditional sense, painting something to blend into its surroundings. It was transformation, turning a factory into a neighborhood, making something strategically vital appear utterly mundane. The project influenced military thinking about camouflage and deception for decades. During World War II, similar projects were undertaken across the United States. In Burbank, California, Lockheed's aircraft assembly plant was camouflaged to resemble suburbs from above. In Virginia, the Army built a decoy airfield complete with fake runways, plywood aircraft, and inflatable vehicles. All of these projects drew on the lessons learned at Boeing Plant too. But Boeing Wonderland also revealed the limits of deception. Despite the elaborate camouflage, the factory was never attacked. The threat that justified the project, Japanese bombing raids on the West Coast, never materialized. In the end, the fake town's greatest achievement was psychological. It gave the people of Seattle a sense of security, a belief that they were doing everything possible to protect themselves. That psychological impact should not be underestimated. In the months after Pearl Harbor, the West Coast was gripped by fear. People broke windows to extinguish lights during blackouts. Japanese Americans were forcibly relocated to internment camps. The panic was real, even if the threat was exaggerated. Boeing Wonderland was a response to that panic. It was a way of saying, we are not helpless, we are not passive, we are taking action. And in that sense it succeeded, even though it was never tested in combat. John Detley, the Hollywood set designer who created the illusion, never returned to the film industry. After the war, he remained in the Pacific Northwest, working as an engineer and designer until his death in 2005 at the age of 96. He rarely spoke about his wartime work, but colleagues remember him as a man who understood the power of perception, the way a carefully constructed illusion could change the course of events. Today, Boeing continues to operate in the Seattle area, though the company's headquarters has moved. Boeing Field is still active, serving commercial and cargo flights. The Duwamish River still flows past the site where Plant 2 once stood, and somewhere in the archives, in fading photographs and brittle newsreels, Boeing Wonderland endures. A 26-acre film set built on a factory roof, a neighborhood that never existed. A deception so elaborate that it became a work of art. It was the war's most ambitious magic trick, a disappearing act performed for an audience that never arrived. And in the end, perhaps that was the greatest success of all. A weapon that won simply by existing, a defense that succeeded because it was never needed. Boeing Wonderland was the shadow that protected the light. And for 3 years, it was Seattle's secret masterpiece, hidden in plain sight, waiting for a threat that never came.